Hey there.
Are we live yet? Hey, Mehdi.
Hey, how's it going, y'all?
Yes, we are officially.
Wait, what?
Oh, it's just
You're
streaming.
live.
Oh, we're live.
Not that it really
Hey,
matters, but hi, everybody. Hi.
Welcome
Yeah. So what's
to the
up?
show. We need
You got a
theme
haircut?
song. I think we need an intro. Oh, I did?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I
You're
did
sharp.
last week. Thank
I
you.
clearly didn't. So.
I mean,
Yeah. If we had
uh,
an audience, I'd be like, let's get an
totally did.
intro. Splash. I mean, I have a splash screen, but I'd have some sort of intro animation, all that sort of crap, and we'd introduce ourselves and all that like fun fanfare. But since we don't, we're really just generating content for the sake of recording conversations. That's all.
I think if we do eventually want to do that, it would be fun to do like a hire someone to record like a goofy radio intro type thing for our show. I don't
It
know
sounds
if
like
y'all- if
Mehdi's
you-
volunteering.
So, okay. So let me clarify: volunteering to record the intro, or volunteering to find someone to do it? Because
to
I don't know if
make
I'd be the best
intro.
person.
Or you could do
I could
some
try.
like generative code art, like there are a lot of options here.
True, very true. Hey, I have a friend who actually just did like a bunch of like interstitial screens and intro screens for a Twitch streamer that turned out really cool.
Oh, really?
That I'm volunteering, but yeah, one of my actually the product manager on my team at work is like a really awesome generative artist. His name is Neil. I'm gonna just go ahead and drop his Instagram, and I would suggest following him if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Hold on, I'll do it in a sec because I have to find it.
Why don't you Slack it to me and I'll drop it in the stream comments.
Yeah, that sounds good. So what's up? How's everyone doing?
Going well. I'm still. I introed Yasirah to that sort of super class proxy sort of challenge. I can give you the same snippet that I want to work and see if you can take a stab at it. I don't know if you want to bother. My head was about to explode like 40 times that night. I just gave up eventually.
No promises, honestly.
So I'll
Just
give you
because I burned out on it. But go ahead.
Yeah. I'll send you the snippet. You can do it. You can ignore it. Do whatever you want with it. Whatever. But obviously, it's the concept of there's no
He knows
super
what he's
class.
doing.
There's no super class. Yeah, right. I'm not saying you can't do this, Mehdi, but I'm pretty sure you can't do it.
But
Yeah. So you're okay. You're taking two classes. The user gives you one. You have the other, or it's a fake class, not even a real class or whatever, right? But you're trying to ultimately treat it like a super class, but where its constructor fires before the user's constructor class. Just like calling super. But their thing does not extend a class. They're completely unaware that something had fired upstream. They don't have to call some sort of weird super thing or whatever. So, like I said, I'll send you the snippet. We'll put this one in chat that you just sent. Cool. There we go. So
I wonder if there is one thing I can be sure of, I think, is that there is no way to do that would feel good to me.
I don't care how the proxy method, whatever the thing is that wraps it, it can do all sorts of dirty stuff. And so I don't care if it looks good, feels good, whatever. I want the end implementation to be pure, right? A class that's completely unaware that another class is fired on it, but has access to anything that class has already embedded into it. So it should be able to, ask for this method that the sort of the fake superclass gave it. So I was using like prototype chains and all sorts of stuff, and I could even get to the point where the superclass constructor did fire before the child class constructor. So it could have like if it said like this.foo is equal to bar, that would be accessible and visible from the child. That was incredible. But it was not able to see its methods. So it wasn't like it was truly getting its prototype chain from it properly.
Interesting.
Can we do like a pair programming on that?
I mean,
Yeah. I mean,
do you guys really want to waste your
Yeah.
time on that? Because this is really painful.
I
I mean, we could even
why
I don't
not?
know. Like,
Maybe not.
maybe not. Well, let's circle back to that. If we are like, you know what, that
We don't have a
challenge, maybe we
topic,
should,
yeah.
yeah, maybe we should talk about it. I'll throw it up on the screen and we can just brainstorm ideas or whatever.
If we do that, one thing I've been doing a lot of with my team recently is VS Code Live Share, which I don't know if y'all have used it before, but it's basically like collaborative editing in VS Code. So you can just start a session and people can just join it, and you just code in the same file, and it's pretty sweet. Actually, you can also give people like write access to your terminal, which is really scary.
That's horrible.
But it works, and you can do all kinds of stuff in it. I haven't tried like rm-rf root yet, but everything else I've tried just works as if you're literally just writing into the host's terminal. So I don't know, if we ever do live coding on this, it would be a cool tool to use, VS Code Live Share. I think GitHub also has something called Code Spaces that lets you do that.
We should certainly check it out.
Any cool, fun, new things that y'all have read or seen that you want to share?
No, I'm still working on those durables, and I'm torn between the. I'm at this crossroads, right? I'm making tools for the community, I guess, and also for myself. But I also feel like I'm spending too much time working on the tools and less time actually using them to like play and see like what I can do with durables, right? So that's a challenge for me. And also, of course, like there's just not a lot of feedback, I guess, at this stage in the durables. So it's like I'm creating the stuff and then like, hey, here it is, and it's like crickets. And that's of course disheartening, but then also just like all right, maybe I should just like not bother sharing at this stage, right? Maybe come back later or let someone else do it. Yeah, so I don't know what the deal is with that, but it is fun though. Like creating these like weird, like improving the interfaces drastically, at least in my opinion, is pretty cool.
Yeah. For me, what's new is that like last night when I don't know, I was working on it's not like a side project, but there's some guy wanted to do a website kind of. It's really like just JavaScript, CSS kind of stuff. So I kind of like stay a little bit late last night, and it was cool doing it just like doing it vanilla style. I don't even remember how to do hover effect, just giving the like the glow on the button anymore. What is the the animation kind of stuff? But it is cool. Like, but then I got an email from Google about the women code jam. Do you know, Mehdi, that's the code challenges for women, and then I was just like, I want to participate, but it's on Saturday, so I don't really have time to prepare. But yeah, we'll see.
That's cool. I've never heard of that before. Is it like it's like a day-long event or something? Is it like a hackathon type thing?
It's 2.5 hour.
So... Oh, okay. I'm looking it up now. Registration for code. Oh, this is part of Google I/O. That's interesting.
Yeah. If you remember, we did have the one that it's not for women, just for everybody. Mm-hmm. Just before we went into lockdown, basically, right?
Yeah,
so and you were, I think you were out of town to Louisiana at that time, so your place was replaced by Krueng. I remember that.
Yeah. I forgot about this. Y'all had a team, right?
Yeah. Well, was the original team was even including Alex. Mm-hmm. But then like those stuff happened, and then Alex is not there anymore, and then Krueng get in, and yeah. So I want to try again, this time just for women.
Yeah, when is it? It's April
Saturday.
17th. Oh, Saturday. Okay. Is it will you have a team, or are you doing an individual one?
Individual one.
Cool. Good luck. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Are there prizes?
The prizes is a ticket
A
for
job at Google?
That's a good price.
wish. I think there's a virtual Google I/O event. A ticket for that and some Visa gift card, I think. If you
Very
make
cool.
to like 150, but like 150 globally, it's gonna be hard.
You got it.
Have faith in yourself. Come on.
Yeah, I think you could do it. Is it scored based on time or what, or like performance?
It is based on like several set of test suit, and then you get penalty for submitting like several times. I believe so. The penalty is more like how many times you try to submit. Yeah. And of course, like they have like last year they have 4 questions, and you can work like in random order. But then of course like the complexity is different, right? You can read all the question first and decide like which one you want to go first.
I see. Interesting.
Yeah. But even the question is really long, so I don't know.
Maybe it'd be cool to if PRs had the same scoring criteria at like work, where like you could only submit once, you only have one commit, and every subsequent commit you don't get that quarters bonus, or that's terrible. Actually, can we delete this recording? Can we just restart the recording? I don't want that.
No, you have to buy me coffee or hot drink every time you submit a new PR, you know?
Yeah, right, exactly. We, at one of my older jobs, we had, like the way we did code reviews was in person together, like at a desk. So like one person would kind of drive the code review and everyone else would comment on it while looking at the code. And it was kind of like, I like the spirit of that idea, but it was really intimidating, especially for like junior engineers. Part of it was because of, I think, the attitude of the senior developers we had there, which was like to kind of use it as a roasting circle almost.
Right. Yeah, I feel like that can totally be fine and good, but the seniors really have to change the way that they approach it, right? They can't start things with, why didn't you blank, right? It's like, well, because that person didn't know better, right? Like, it's like any junior, like they don't know your system. They don't know all the tricks of the trade. So like the why didn't you should just be left out. It's like, oh, hey, yeah, that's really cool. Here's a way you might save you for the future or whatever. You know, I get that.
Yeah.
I always get that. It's that why didn't you use this other thing? And it's kind of like the, you idiot. It's like, this other thing exists. I'm like, well, sometimes there's a valid reason for it, but like, it's just not a good way to phrase that, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, for sure. I think like phrasing, I just attended a conference called Lead Dev, which had a few different workshops on like leadership behaviors and like leading teams of engineers and stuff like that. And one of the sessions was on feedback and giving good strategies for delivering feedback. And the terms you use and the structure of your sentences is really important. I think especially in PR review and development, right, with engineers that are more junior, just because like the why didn't you is both so it sounds very condescending, and also sometimes you're just wrong. Like there has been so many times where I've thought by reading some code that, oh, why wouldn't they just do this, or why wouldn't they just do that? Of course, I'm not going to word it that way. I would maybe say like, could we do this, or like, is this something we could do? But sometimes, you know, people really did do X and found out that there is some limitation that you're not taking into account, where you're just looking at a PR, right? So yeah, totally agree. It's all about like, first of all, like calling out anything positive you see, but also saying like, hey, I noticed you did this. Could we do this instead? Or like, is there, would this work? Or asking questions instead of, asking questions that are positive and
Right.
not, accusatory.
Yeah. And, offering suggestions, but even then wrapping those suggestions with a, maybe you already tried this, but, like this is what I would do sort of thing. And, maybe this will help you. And if not, stop me sort of thing. But it's like, always kind of like give them escape hatches and yourself escape hatches for these things and make it okay. Make it okay to fail. Make it okay to be wrong. Make it okay to not be the most optimal solution. And then don't make it sound like whatever you say is going to be some sort of gold standard. They have to like just sort of nod and like, oh yeah, that's awesome. Like maybe it's not awesome. A lot of my ideas suck. I'm just kidding. Just 2 of them. No, this week has been very humbling for me.
Prototype.
Oh my god. Yeah, I was telling Yasirah, like, I have never felt so dumb about this language that I have used for like 20 something years. It's like, and for the most part, it's because we don't have to, right? We don't have to know exactly how some of the inner workings work because most developers will never need to touch that stuff. You talk about like prototype chains and stuff like that. Like 99% of the JavaScript developers probably never even need to know that exists. They can just sort of use it, assign some variables, move on, remap some variables, whatever they need to do. But when you need to do like weird proxy crap like this, or like sort of just mangle the way objects are working in your system, like you kind of need to know the inner workings, and I clearly just don't.
But then like knowing the prototype will help you like code too, though, right? Even like probably it's mostly optimization. For example, instead of like, if you know the classes, inheritance, and so on and so forth, instead of, let's say, giving creating a function on the instances itself, you created it as like, the method on the prototype. So it is being created just one, and those kind of stuff. If you're not really understand that part, you just put like all your data, all your method, everything in the instances, and then you creating this method like repeatedly every time you create the instance, right? So
but I would still say that falls probably within the 1%, right? That's an optimization thing.
And so, it is.
Yes, you'll run into like memory limits on that because of that sort of behavior, but most people don't really operate in that space of I'm churning through so much data and creating so many objects that I need to care about efficiencies like that. So it's still just such a dark art that there's just not a ton of documentation on it. Like, and then what documentation there is, because it's that sort of weird dark art, it's not done by the same creative, very like vibrant personalities that are doing things like, I don't know, ES6 hacks or CSS hacks or like little React tips, like that have like really great authors creating very fun and informative documentation. So you go back to these like prototype chain sort of documentations. Number one, they're mostly from like 2013 and below. And they're written by like people that clearly don't care about relating to normal humans. Would be a polite way to put it for the most part. It's just like super in the weeds. A lot of assumptions made, and you're just kind of like I don't even know if this is relevant at this point because it doesn't seem like it's relevant based on what we know now about JavaScript. It's a struggle.
Yeah. It's interesting. I recently had an interview and prototypes came up. That was like one of the questions I got asked. And it wasn't direct. It was, and it was very high level. So it wasn't like, it didn't require me to know, okay, like how do I like patch an object's prototype with some other prototype, or how do I manipulate the prototype chain or use it in programming? I did get asked about like, so I'll just say the question. It's basically, my first question was like, can you write a function that will take a string and split it into characters and then return a string of characters with commas in between, right? So basically like string.split with an empty string.join with like a comma, something like that, right? And then the second part of the question was, can you write how can you write this so that I can say like string.split commas and have that return a new string with like the same functionality, like separated by commas. So essentially the answer was to
dot prototype dot.
Yeah, exactly. Like extend the string prototype with an extra method. And then so like I didn't really let it get to the point where I would get asked more about it, because what I said was like, well, I wouldn't do this.
That's good.
Like I probably wouldn't do this. But like here
don't
you go.
pollute primitives.
Yeah, like don't try this at home. And you know, I kind of intercepted it and said, well, you know, like MooTools was like kind of problematic in the ecosystem because they did this, and like now ECMAScript can't use certain method names because old MooTools versions extended the array prototype. So like I kind of got into like the history of why this is a bad idea, just to kind of preempt all the questions that I felt I was going to be asked. So
to show off, you mean? To show off.
Straight
up. That's show off. Well, actually, let me give you a history lesson about MooTools. And
yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I've never in my life used MooTools, right? So it's not like I
didn't miss out.
Heard about MooTools. But you know, I thought about it and I was like, I don't think that's that bad of a question, because if you're coming from like an object-oriented background, you're used to extending base classes all the time. You're used to inheritance, even though inheritance isn't even like super loved in OOP anymore. It's like kind of inheritance in general, like people kind of frown upon it. But you're used to inheritance as a pattern compared to JavaScript land, where everything is like very functional and functional composition. But it does help to know, right? Like it does help to know those kinds of things, at least at a level where you could problem solve. And then for something like a library or a tool, I feel like it would be something that maybe you would want to solve that problem once, if ever, and then never want to touch it again. But I don't know, like kind of hairy territory to get into to maintain a tool that like really touches, you know, like the internals of how JavaScript's inheritance model works.
Yeah.
The only valid reason is I think like what you're trying to do, Kevin, which is like I'm trying to create this kind of API that can't exist otherwise.
Right. And it's rare. Like in my time so far, this is the first time I'm like, I really want this signal. And all I really know is the end interface that I want, right? Like that's, and I like working that way. It's like, here's how I want my code to look in the very end. Now, how do I achieve that? And then it's like, it's not even possible. Good luck, Kevin. Okay. So then, random question: how would you have a class, and obviously it has its own constructor. Is there any way to like bootstrap that class before that constructor fires with data? That instance, sorry.
Like a pre-constructor?
Yep. Like basically initialize that instance from some sort of object or whatever else. Or other constructor, doesn't matter. But, you know, ultimately it's some other object is already there before that constructor goes.
So basically what I mean, this is like, you asked me this a while back too, is like, how can I not call super?
Right. I know. And I'm like,
what this is.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't think you can, honestly. Well, I don't know. Like, prove me wrong. But I was telling you, Yasirah, earlier, I was playing with like reflect construct and stuff like that. And I actually got it. So for the record, I got it to where I could fire basically both constructors and in the correct order, without the child one ever being aware that there was a parent constructor. So that was actually really cool. What I couldn't do at that point is get to the methods of that more or less super class. And so it's like something about like the prototype chain was broken, and I couldn't just, I can't say I couldn't. I didn't know enough about it to be able to reconnect it properly. And I tried a few things and then failed. But yeah, it's a weird one. And then it's also, it feels dirty too. And when you're remapping prototype chains, that doesn't feel particularly any cleaner than saying, hey, I just give you a base class to extend, you know? Mm-hmm. At least base class is a lot more obvious in terms of like what you're doing. But I'm assuming you've like gone through the full gamut of like Stack Overflow answers for this, right? Because I'm doing some searching, and first of all of this makes my brain hurt.
Yes, it made mine as well. I did
Yeah,
object
but it also
create,
feels-
reflect construct. I did prototype chains. I tried proxies to basically intercept any request, but the problem was I couldn't intercept that construct. That was the biggest issue. So all the other ones I could do, but the construct, I wanted to be able to basically call this dot something that sort of super constructor gave it. Now I know that defeats the purpose anyway, because ultimately that's no longer testable because it's asking for something that can't exist unless you've sort of injected it already.
I wonder though so when you say so you used a proxy, you proxied the class, right?
Well, I did try that, and ultimately that seemed to accomplish absolutely nothing except for me being able to intercept the constructor, which didn't really gain me much. So I think I stopped that route entirely.
Yeah, but you would need to intercept the constructor for the class. Would you be able to like? I wonder, could you intercept the constructor for the class? Well, then you'd have to basically, yeah.
You still have to fire a constructor. That's the catch. So it's like you can intercept it, but you got to fire it eventually or fire another constructor. And those constructors just, it's not like, hey, you can fire these two constructors together or chain this constructor into this constructor.
The way where my mind is wandering is if you proxy the class and trap the construct, then you would need to do something like set a value for this on the instance before new, which doesn't work, right? Like, because when you call new on your target class, the constructor is running, it's binding a bunch of stuff to this. At that point, you would expect super to be called if it's extending a class.
Right.
I mean, if it's proxied, there's no extension, so you don't need to call super. But would you be able to patch this, like create a separate instance? My brain is hurting, but
I know, could you bind the constructor to a different context and then fire it?
That's what I'm thinking, right? Like if you were to bind the constructor to a different context, trap that context, and then apply it to the instance that the constructor is creating, if that makes sense, right?
Yes.
Something to that effect.
Can we bind different contexts to constructor?
You should be able to, right? Because it's just a method.
Yeah, it's a function, sure.
You should be able to do like, target.prototype.constructor.bind some object.
Right. So you could, in theory, give it a base object to work off of. And that base object could have its own prototype, basically the superclass.
Sure.
That might work. Yeah, so then if you trap the constructor on the class, you're absolutely right. You trap the constructor, you rebind it to this sort of super construct, the super, like the output of that, basically even the instance if you need to or whatever.
But then you also have to reapply that context to the instance that the constructor creates after it does that, or no? Because
I don't think so.
The constructor is going to create its own. It's going to create its own this. But if you're binding, I don't know. Yeah, you might not need to.
I don't know. More
this
terms.
Is a fun stream.
Whatever. It's a fun challenge though. It's kind of like anytime someone says this is impossible, I'm like, okay, maybe not.
Tried this.
Right? Like it's the like the famous can you swap two variables without a third variable? And I have been able to do it a couple times. I don't remember how at this point. Like it still sounds impossible to me when I describe it, but with an ex-boss of mine, we whiteboarded and then tested it and got tests going, and we both came up with very different methods by which you could juggle two variables without a third variable. Exactly right.
In JavaScript?
Okay.
Yep. So basically function AB, returns BA or whatever, but with no temporary variables. And I use logic gates to do it.
Interesting. I
I
love
don't
when
remember.
people's solution to that is to use like destructuring with an array. It's
Yeah.
like you're creating a temporary array literal. Like,
Right.
like it's just because it's not, like, yeah, syntactically it looks like you're doing it without doing like a let foo equals, whatever, let temp. But
I mean, yeah.
that doesn't
And
mean you're not
let's be
creating a new
real.
object.
Like my solution was also in underneath the hood, it was using a temporary placeholder because it's like it's evaluating this sort of logic, assignment or whatever, and that itself is technically a temporary variable, which I was
Yeah.
leveraging, of course, but
I think
still
like
no C variable.
yeah, I think like many JavaScript developer that don't really, don't really take into consideration that you're creating new thing, new object, or even though like okay, you're mapping something, mapping an array. Are you really like creating a new array, or are you just like doing it in place? But with map, you're actually with map actually it's the returning a new array, right? And then you're doing like a map, and it's like creating new array all the time. But then with slice, for example, and splice, which one is which? I always like uh cannot
Yep.
remember which one was which when I first
Splice actually manipulates. Slice is just
yeah.
a shallow copy.
Yeah,
think there's like
and again,
a
like shallow copy. What is shallow copy really like? You're copying things, but then like it's just a shallow copy.
I don't
And
think
that's-
I in a way I don't feel like these are things like you should just start off teaching. Right? I think it's something that people should discover along their path, and it's kind of like you're gonna understand its use when you get there and when you run into that brick wall. If you just try to like teach everyone about, hey, this is passing by reference, this is not passed by reference, this is mutating it in place, this is not, here's shallow copy versus deep copy. How do you dirty check? Like it would just overwhelm a new developer, I would assume. But like the first time you're trying to copy an object and you're like why aren't these lower level things coming in, or why are they when I don't want them to be? That's when you're like, what's going on here? And you start asking the questions, and then you're going to find the answers. But if you were given that answer way too early, like when you're learning about what the hell a var is, and here's a number versus
oh
a
my
string,
gosh,
you're gonna be
that's
like,
also like var and let and
right.
the scoping of JavaScript. What less?
Yeah, I guess like that's probably the reason why you hear often people like make general kind of manifesto type declarations like you should always do this or you should never do this, like always use immutable types, or like immutable kind of like always create new objects, always like use immutability, those kinds of things, because I don't know, I guess like it makes sense why you would expect someone who's not aware of those things to get into those traps. But also like when they become dogmatic, I kind of agree with Kevin and think that it kind of limits it makes you kind of reinforce those thoughts instead of like having the curiosity to explore like why or when is it okay, or like when is mutation okay, when it's not okay, those kinds of things.
Right.
Similar to what you're describing, Yasirah, like if you're reducing an array and you're using like object spread or something, syntactically it looks great, it looks expressive and clean, but you're like creating a new object on every iteration. But like, just knowing that itself is
It's also really
going
fast.
through it once. Yeah. It's, knowing like when that's okay, when it's not okay, when, being able to make those trade-offs, I think that in learning about it is so much more important than just saying, oh, always use this or never use this, or always create new objects, etc.
I agree.
It is hard to let. Yeah, I mean, like I'm trying to let Lenny start to use array methods more rather than like the simple old loop. But then again, like I don't need her to do every loop with the array method too, right? But then like the feel of it, like when to use and when not to use, is really hard. It's not something you can simply teach with like clear line,
Mm-hmm.
like.
I think you give them a broad stroke path, and I think in the beginning, honestly, I would probably encourage people onto the array methods path, because it's very chainable. It's relatively human readable, which means they can probably follow the code. Things like for loops that are like building things and pushing onto a brand new array, or changing indexes and stuff like that. That can be a little bit like messy to read later. Certainly, we don't even like to see them like half the time. So I would just be like, use the built-in array methods and kind of explain them like little sandbox style. Here's how to remap some characters into other characters, or uppercase them, or whatever else, like little.
But then
little
how
fun
would you
things.
say like, use this built-in array, but never use for each?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I'd just be like, hey, look, so here's why we do this, right? So we do this because it's sort of readable. You can say, okay, I'm going to take this source, I'm going to do some steps, some actions to it, rather than read a whole long bit of code and try to keep track in my head what's being built. Because you can sort of see it in like these array functions, like, map and stuff. Reduce is, it's everyone's double-edged sword friend. Reduce is very powerful, but you can get by without ever using a reduce. And so I wouldn't start there. But
not if you need a one-liner code though.
Oh, that's true. And I love reduce. Don't get me wrong. To Mehdi's point, though, also, like, I 100% agree that I don't believe in these black and whites, and I never did. I love JavaScript for the fact that it's pure 100% gray. There are a million ways to do anything, and that's a sucky answer to give.
50 shades of it.
50, yeah, there are 50 shades at least. It's a crappy answer to give to a junior, right? They're like, hey, how would I do this? And you're like, well, it depends. And then you just sort of walk away like that's not a good answer. They want that sort of that easy path. And so I do feel like we should have the broad strokes, like here's broadly what I recommend. You just use some array methods, for instance. The all and the never, like, oh my God, this is like the sort of crap in politics we see, like, I speak for every true American when I say this. Right. And you're like, no American speaks for every true American. There's not a single one of us. Same thing with developers, like you end up looking like an ass. So don't make these hard rules like you always have to have immutable things and pure functions only. They said that in React, and then guess what? They introduced hooks. That's the exact opposite of these pure functions. Like, now we have this sort of
no one talks about it.
Yeah, no one talks about it. It's like we just reversed 180 degrees. Everything we've been preaching, and you've been preaching to your junior devs and everyone else, and we're like, hey, but this is shorter code, so it's okay now. Like, it's complete pollution. Of course I like it. Does it make testing harder? Of course. But
about React Hook though, again, like it is really hard to have a really good understanding on the user fact. I see a lot of, mostly on the junior side, using that ESLint ignore kind of stuff that are really honest about the dependency array, and then mapping the user file with the class lifecycle, like the component did mount. It's not really working the same way. And then when it's not, they're kind of like, well, I'm doing it on the component did mount, but you're using hook. There's no component did mount in hook, right? You are mimicking it, but it triggers at the different point of the rendering and stuff. Sure. So yeah, it's I think like if a developer really started with React Hook, probably it's better, but it's kind of hard if he or she needs to implement, a third-party library that is using old React pattern, the class.
Oh God.
But probably she'll have like really good understanding of hook, because coming in from class to hook, I was the same way. I was thinking like, this is just the same thing. It's component did mount, component did update, but
it
different syntax. It
like,
kind of is, but
I didn't find use effect that bad. There are some
Yeah,
gotchas, but I
it's
think they're
not. Yeah,
yeah. I was gonna say
there's a
I think there are
gotcha.
gotchas regardless, and they were back with the ESX class days as well. Like people think like, oh, when it mounts, that's like when you're creating this component, and then like they're passing new props, but the thing hasn't remounted. It's just getting new data, and they're like, why isn't this firing? Like, well, it's already mounted. It's gonna stay mounted until you just remove it from the DOM. There are always those sort of gotchas. I do find it dirty. I understand it, like the use effect, and I use it all the time. I just find hooks. It's not even hooks. Like, I like hooks for where we came from in React. And Mehdi and I were talking about this earlier. Like, I feel like state is just, it's been dirty. It was the hardest thing for me to, besides lifecycle, it was the hardest thing for me to understand truly in React when I first got into it. And this is back in like the set state sort of days.
That's it. Yeah.
Because I came from Angular JS, and I'm like, man, like there was some bliss. Like I create some objects, they're class objects. It doesn't matter. I've got class methods on them and stuff like that, and I'm firing them, and that DOM's just updating. And it was magical. And then I go to React, and I'm like, you're like, yo, you can't do that. You got to use immutable one way, and then Redux basically instantly switch to Redux. And I was like, man, I used to move so fast in Angular, and now it's so slow in React. And now I'm pretty fast at React again, of course. But we still have to use like really weird patterns, I feel like.
Yeah.
And then hooks are just...
Do you like see the similarity of like use effect, use callbacks and stuff with array method dot reduce? Like, because the dependency array is down on the bottom, right? Just like reduce with the initializer. So to understand the code, you have to look like on the bottom first, what's changing.
Sure, and I totally get that, but to the same pattern as reduce that we discussed, like it's because it's an optional, and I get that. Like classic dependency stuff has always, or at least in my experience, has been at the top, right? A function has dependencies. It's the parameters, and we give them at the top. Angular, for instance, you injected your dependencies at the top, and you brought them back down. This is opposite, but it's because it's optional.
But then, like, even if it's optional, you need to know if there is something there, right? Like
sure.
With function, you have arguments. Some of them optional too, but they're up there in the context already when you read. Well, for readable, I feel like the function signature is easier to read because it's top to bottom rather than like.
What does use effect do when you have not even the empty array?
Just runs every time.
Yeah,
right. So at that point, you may as well have it reversed, because like you would never want a block of code that runs every time, or why would you wrap it in that thing in the first place? Right. So you may as well pass the dependencies up front and say, hey, this is what we're watching, and here's what you do when these things change.
The reason you would want it on a use effect is because it runs after all the DOM work. So it's like it runs after render. So so it's like, which itself is weird, right? Because now your component is a function that runs top to bottom, but your use effect is actually running after the render. You're giving it a callback somewhere at the top of your code and saying, hey, once you render, run this.
That's a good point. Good point.
Yeah. But then like use layout effect is like the same, but it happens before the DOM, like the render step to the DOM. It happens after component reconciliation, but before it's painted, which is like, sometimes you need that, sometimes you don't. The like one, actually, I'm going to go against what I said earlier around like the dogma. And like the one thing that I've been doing more of with hooks that has made it easier, I think, for other people to understand the hooks that I write and for me to understand them, is I just write more hooks. Like if I don't group any effects together, I write like 5 or 6 or 7 different use effects for each different side effect that a component that I have is doing. And sometimes I just like wrap the related ones in a custom hook and just makes it easier to read, because otherwise it gets really messy. I remember like Yasirah, when we were working on the data seer stuff, like early on, we had some components like the little Tinder view component that we had, where there were like 7 or 8 or 9 like use effects and use callbacks and like just a bunch of different hooks in there that were really hard to read and understand.
I refactor some of them, but yeah.
So yeah, I pray for you and I thank you that you did that. I'm sorry for what I did to your mental health and sanity by writing that code. But you know what I mean? Like if, you know, it's great to collect a couple of hooks that are otherwise like completely unreadable, wrap them in a custom hook and give them a name so that when you're reading the component, it's like, okay, at least like without having to go look at the implementation detail, I can kind of tell
Totally
what's going
agree.
on here. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. I don't know if you've gone far enough down Vue and Svelte to be able to have a solid answer on this, but like obviously you're very well versed in like the hooks and component flow in React. Like, have you run into the same issues in Svelte or Vue? Like these are independent, right? And then like, how does each one handle it in terms of like better or worse? Like, can they do the same things even? I know Svelte is a little different. That's kind of like a sidebar because Vue is very similar to React and Svelte is not.
Yeah. I haven't played with Vue in a long time. Back when I used to play with Vue more, they didn't have like the composition API, which is like kind of the new hooks-like API that they added in Vue 3. So it was like lifecycle methods, and it was exactly as you would expect. You would have like lifecycle methods bound to the component lifecycle, similar to class components in React. So like same problems there, but also one thing that Vue had from the jump that was very helpful was like computed properties built in. So
Nice.
I find that like, yeah, like, I mean, that's basically like use memo, right? But it's a little bit more accessible because they're bound to the context of your component. So you can just say like, you define your computed properties and then anywhere else you just say this dot, you know, like foo, and this dot foo, it just resolves to the computed value at that time. That was kind of cool. The new composition API stuff, it looks very hooks-like, but I haven't played with it. With Svelte, I do think it's better for sure. It's a lot simpler. State management and knowing, like having to worry about updating state after async work and that kind of stuff is like very, you're just writing regular JavaScript as if you're storing stuff in memory. There's a couple of things where lifecycle comes into play, like stuff, say if you're writing some code that expects DOM to be in place, you have like on-mount lifecycle hook that you can use. But aside from like that's the only one I've ever used. I don't know if there are other ones. The other parts are very straightforward. Svelte also has a really cool thing called actions, which are kind of like a hooks type interface, but they're a function that you can bind to the lifecycle of an element that can manipulate the DOM element directly, and it's self-contained. You wouldn't use it for things like state, but you would use it for stuff like side effects or for like mouse position, for those kinds of things, and providing that information downstream to other components. So I actually really like the way Svelte solves that problem, where it's like, it doesn't just say, here are hooks for everything. It's like,
right,
the state part, let me just handle the way that it makes the most sense, which is just to say like state.foo equals bar. The effects part, let me just handle that in actions, which is like a thing that's bound to a lifecycle. And then the mounting and DOM dependent stuff, let me just handle that with a lifecycle hook where that makes the most sense on mount, instead of having to worry about dependency arrays and that kind of stuff.
Let me ask you, like, along those lines, like, I've only seen simple examples of Svelte. And so like, I feel like once you got past the simple examples of like, hey, yes, this component itself has state and you can just manipulate the state and that component itself re-renders, that's great and fantastic, whatever. What happens when you need to talk to external state, right? And it wasn't passed in as a prop. How do you do it?
So Svelte also comes comes with stores built in. So that's something like if you, like MobX like stores basically that have observable APIs. So you can, if you have external state, or if you prefer to lift your state out of like component code, you can wrap it in a store and you can have components subscribe to it. And so you can very easily like create a subscription to some store and update a local variable if you wanted to, you know, react to store updates.
Gotcha.
You can have readable and writable stores. Stores can wrap APIs, those kinds of things. So I like that it has an opinionated built-in, but also like kind of standard store.
Yeah, like as time goes on, like obviously I'm okay with, like, magic comes at a price. It always does. So it's helpful in that particular case to have a very strong opinion, say, here's what we think, here's what we're going to provide. It's the 90%. But then of course I like but there's a way around it, right? And that's how I try to code as well, which is I'm going to try to get you most of the way there. But for the people that are like, super custom, here's your path and it's going to involve more work. But I just don't want to block anyone. And I would expect the same thing from like Svelte, where it's like, oh, you got to use our ecosystem or you just can't do state. Like, I mean, like, yeah, I was like, I don't know. React a little different, I guess, because we are just basically playing by their ball.
Yeah, I always found it a little odd that, well, at first I didn't, but now I do. The whole idea that like React is just a library, it's not very opinionated, it's super flexible, like you can use it with whatever tools you like. And maybe that was like true for a time. I feel like now with React being like they announced server components, so they have like components on the server and client that are like the same component as part of the framework now. In order to write React, 99.9% of the time you're writing JSX, right? So you have like Babel transforms, some kind of compile step just to compile your React into JavaScript. So it's like, it's not really a library, right? It's kind of, parts of it are, but parts of it aren't. You really need to buy into React to use it. I always found it odd that they made that decision, but don't offer more opinionated ways of solving the problem of state across components, like stores, and like they have context, but they like constantly say like context isn't something you should use for state, like it's Redux because it's not performant. But then the framework doesn't come with a solution for it. I don't know.
Right.
Like, I get also that like they're trying to not make the overhead of the library larger, but I feel like maybe that's kind of a fault of React's architecture, where it's like you're shipping like 30, 40 kilobytes of JavaScript just to run React on your website. But it doesn't really come with a lot of these extra things that you would want out of a framework to make an app. So you have to like rely on either your own hand-rolled solutions or ecosystem solutions. So it's gonna be non-standard and you're adding to your bundle size.
Yep, I agree. I feel like that if they had just included more and more opinions, more of the core functionality, routers, my God, like how can you not have a router built into your framework? And you can't just say, oh, it's not a framework, it's a library, and kind of get away with that. Like these core things that virtually every app does need to some degree, like I feel like should have included. I think where React won over Angular, at least in my opinion, is its syntax. And it's just simple, functional. It's very understandable. Now the JSX thing is its own sort of different battle and whatnot, but I actually didn't mind it. I was like, thank God I don't need to wrap my markup in single and escaping quotes over and over again, or have some sort of weird template language that goes beyond. I mean, I was okay with that in Angular, but like, I didn't feel like JSX was particularly worse than like those things with their declarative expression languages kind of blended into the markup. So I think they should have kept their syntax of like how you design components and how that sort of stuff worked. Maybe the state aside. But then taking a more Angular approach of, hey, we're going to give you lots of the main tool blocks, and then make sure it's just all tree shakeable, right? Like that would, the dream world is if I'm not using a router, for instance, I don't need to bring that router into my code base.
Yeah, not to beat a dead horse, but that's kind of one thing I like about Svelte, which is that all that stuff compiles away if you're not using it. So it has built-in primitives for animations, and if you're not using them, they don't get compiled into your application bundle, which is like super cool.
I'm telling you, the moment I get some like real free time, I get off this stupid worker stuff and get Slick just redone in durables. It's going to be full tilt Svelte, because I'm just getting to that tipping point where I'm like, React, I love you. It's been a wonderful relationship, but you're getting some cracks around the eyes.
It might, and like this might not be the ticket. I'm not saying
right, of course,
Svelte is perfect, but it's just interesting to think about like, okay, well, how do we get better from here? It's always interesting. I feel like whenever it feels like I don't like, I act like I've been around for so long that I would know the answer to this, or like I'm speaking from experience, but it feels like whenever you see the job market start to get saturated with something, it's like almost like a correlated with like, hey, this thing is kind of becoming too heavy to innovate.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because now that you just don't have as much mobility. You can't do breaking changes. You can't make like huge API additions because people are hiring based on these like skill sets. So I don't know, just feels like it has heavier weight associated with it.
And then I'm still blown away by like the fact that we still see things like people discussing Redux solutions. I'm just like, is that still being taught now, or like are people just like so stuck in code bases that they haven't had the chance to explore new state management? But yeah, like that's, I don't know if you saw the thing on Twitter, like the little animated graph of like framework popularity or whatever, and Vue like completely destroyed, like came in and like just trounced over everybody so fast. It's because the other ones just can't move that quickly. And Svelte also, when it came on, like it hasn't passed the others yet, but it's like it's coming on at incredible velocities that the others just don't have, because they're in that sort of like slow moving behemoth days, and they'll keep going for years. I expect React to be around for another 5 or 10 years at least, in some form or another. Like we won't be coding in it by that point, but somebody will be. So I'm very curious. I still don't love Vue, but Svelte I think I want to try. And there are things I don't love about Svelte either. Like I still imagine a world where like it's like what I don't understand about Svelte, and this is just kind of like my random 2 cents. If you're going to do a compiled sort of thing anyway, you've got complete control and you can make up anything you want. Do we really still need these things like script tags, like HTML open script, closed script, and open style, closed style? Like we're making stuff up here. Like I want less.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think they're trying to like toe a line of like using platform stuff, and it doesn't make sense because you're already using an expression language. You're already using a compiler, and
right.
Like
you're making
I get the
a
spirit
language.
of it. I appreciate it. Yeah, it is a language. That's like, it is a language. Like it's a different language. It's not JavaScript or HTML or CSS. It's a language that kind of uses all those 3 syntaxes basically.
Right. And so like that's when I like, as a person that designs interfaces, like I start off with how I want my code to look. And it's not like, how do I want my code to look while still being 100% familiar to what you've already been doing for decades? Like if we're saying, hey, look, here's the future of coding, we probably don't need to carry those decades of baggage along with us in terms of assumptions and like familiarities. It should be intuitive based on our present understanding, but not because it's like a familiar old blanket that we take to bed. Okay, so paired programming now, right? I'm just kidding. I figure with 30 seconds, we can totally solve this.
Hey, I was trying it in the background and I didn't make any progress.
Oh man,
don't count on me.
I
had a repellent open on the side, like doodling, and
it was the most frustrating evening, and I was up till about 2 a.m. and just like eventually just crashed out. Like, and you just like wake up feeling so defeated. You're like, I tried and tried and tried and tried and tried and failed over and over.
It's so sad.
I know. And all for someone no one's asking for.
Tell us all about your challenge on Saturday. I'm excited to hear about it.
Will you know your rank at the end of the day? I'm assuming yes, right? Yasirah?
Oh, sorry. I was zoning
She's
out.
zoned out, not even listening to us. Mehdi said he was excited to hear about your code challenge on Saturday, and I was like, "Are you going to find out your rank that day?" I'm assuming.
I don't know. Probably yeah. I think it's even live. The last time we did it, they have a live leaderboard. But like,
can we watch the live leaderboard and watch you like ticking up and ticking down? I mean, up
oh
only.
my gosh! I'll just like no.
This is like watching like the marathon where you're like your friend is. You're like, oh my god, they're about to cross the line.
Have you seen like the example of the code yet? It's like. It's okay. Like the easiest one is okay. I feel probably I'll score some some point. That's my goal for now, just to get some points. But yeah,
I feel like we need like a watching party and have like a big screen up with Yasirah's rank. Is it?
no. But if I'm on the top leaderboard, I'll ping you too for sure. Hey, watch the leaderboard. If not, I'll keep quiet.
Makes sense. You're like, okay, this is worth sharing, or this is embarrassing.
I know.
Well, we're rooting for you. That's exciting. I'm glad you're doing that. That's fun.
Yeah, taking my mind out of like work for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. But then my husband said, "Oh, you'll be cranky this Saturday."
I'm so torn, like between loving algorithmic challenges like that, like Advent of Code, that's algorithmic, right? You guys go a little bit further than I do in like the dynamic programming and all that sort of crap with elite code. But I'm like, I really enjoy those, but then they also like are painful sometimes. To where I'm just like, oh, like this is why I just build stuff. Like,
but when you get that little gold star though,
I know
it's a good feeling. Hey, when I finish the thing, and this might motivate both of you to finish it next year. There were like fireworks on the page, and then there are animations everywhere.
Wait,
so...
Advent?
Mm-hmm.
You actually beat it like all this year?
Yeah, he did.
Well, I definitely
Come
didn't.
on, Kevin, start it again. I mean, it's still open, right? Like,
I just need to take
it's
a year
almost
off.
December. It's like already April, so we're almost there.
Right.
oh no,
Exactly.
don't say that.
Wait, did you say, Sarah, were you telling me to finish last year's?
Yeah, Kevin.
There's no motivation at this point.
If you do one, do the puzzle one, and well, actually don't. if you do all of them but one, skip the puzzle one, because that drove me. Like the final day, the challenge was really easy. It was only one part. The second part was like, congratulations! Like all you have to do for this part is to have 49 other stars. So I was like, crap, I have to go do the puzzle one. Like I can't finish this one. So
Nice.
then on the last day, I sat down and I wrote like part 2 of the puzzle one. But I left it. I was like, I can't do this. It frustrated me. I left it, did all the other ones, and I had to go back to it.
Did you stream the whole time, or did you stop streaming?
I streamed maybe like a third of the total. Like some days I didn't stream, some days I streamed. And I never actually like uploaded all my streams to YouTube, but I have like all the recordings, so maybe one day I will. But I have it on camera, me finishing it and being really excited.
Like, I think that was one of my challenges. I think live streaming it was probably a mistake. It was good and bad, right? The good part is, yeah, you're practicing streaming. Number 2, you're talking your code out loud while you're coding, which is cool. The downside is like, I feel like there's undue pressure. And so it's almost like when people are watching you type and you're always making typos. And then as soon as the camera's off and no one's behind your shoulder, like, I can type fine now. Like, it's kind of like that. I feel like things took a little bit longer because you're like feeling a little bit of that sort of like observation pressure, even though of course no one was watching me. But.
And also like, I think when you have to explain your code while you're coding or solving the code challenges, is the problem for me is my mind is faster than my mouth and my finger actually, right? Like my mind is already analyzing, no, you're in that end now, but I'm still trying to explain this, and my mind's already want to try another approach, this kind of stuff. Probably that's why like in whiteboarding they always come up with like, what is your plan, how do you want to solve this first, right? Like and then do the test suit and just like using simple whiteboarding, is this plan is sound at least, and then you code. But usually for me it's just like, I'm gonna code and my mind will analyze. In
Same
parallel.
Here. I try to whiteboard sometimes. I feel like data organization makes sense when you're whiteboarding. Like I like to do that.
Yeah.
Only when you're talking about like who owns what, how's this stuff, but flow through the app. I'm like, nah, I got this in my head. And I always regret it, but it's what I always do. So it doesn't matter. Yeah, I start just coding.
I'm not gonna lie, I actually loved coding on stream.
Really?
I really
you're a naturally
enjoy
good
it.
teacher too. I feel like it suited you really well.
It was really fun.
I do say
I think
this.
it helped me also at work.
Yasirah, yeah, I agree. I think becoming familiar, and it's very similar to pair programming, right? Because there's someone sitting there in the room with you, and so you're not just going to be like coding silently. You're going to be talking about what you're doing, why you're doing it, etc. I feel like, Yasirah, that as you do this, in the beginning, maybe it's a little weird. After a little bit of time, it actually becomes like second nature just to sort of talk out loud while you're doing things. Even if it's sort of, I maybe pause occasionally while I'm sort of churning through my head. It almost becomes like second nature. It doesn't really slow you down as much. Yes, that is Vlad. Where is he? Oh, he's trying to get out of the room.
I was like, that sounds like a familiar sound.
If it's not really like a hard problem, right? It's fun to actually do pair programming. I enjoy pair programming, and I can code and then just like slowly go through like what I'm doing, what I'm trying to do. But if it is like you want to solve this, and then this is you also doesn't have any idea yet how to solve it, that's the hardest part of it, I think. But if I have an idea of, okay, I've seen this before, this is what I'm trying to do, I enjoy it. Like
I agree. When you're in your comfort zone, talking out loud makes total sense. And yes, when I need like real brain power, I can't multitask. I can't even walk through the grocery store taking a phone call. So I definitely can't like talk out loud while I'm trying to solve a huge, horrible puzzle in my head. I'm like, nope, I can't do anything. I might as well go sit on a chair and just like stare into space.
Probably like the first few days of code challenge is fun to stream live.
Yes.
But after that, it's gonna be a pain.
Yeah, exactly right. That's what I found too. After a few days, I'm like, phew.
Yeah, I think there were like 2 or 3 of them that I didn't finish on stream, and at least one I can remember. It was like I got frustrated on the stream. I'd been streaming for like 2 hours. I didn't get to finish part 2, and then I stopped my stream and went and solved it in like 10 minutes. And so that happened to me too, for sure. Although like it was very satisfying to get a new problem also and like kind of work like it. I think it was good practice. It was definitely like difficult, I would say. Like it's not like a intuitive thing. The comfort zone thing, yeah, totally. Like if I'm in my comfort zone, if I know that something is like a problem I've solved and I'm just like talking through it, it's easy, natural.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And also like the 2 hours streaming, you're just nonstop coding. Where's the Pomodoro clock?
There's no Pomodoro clock.
Wait, what is?
Although sometimes I would go on tangents. Have you used like a Pomodoro timer before?
What is it?
Well, like when I was in Lambda, the school kind of like wanted us to try. I mean, like I cannot. That's just not me. For me, when I code. But then, yeah.
No. What is this clock? Explain it. Come on.
It's like a technique where you. Well, Yasirah, do you want to explain it?
Yeah, it's like I think you just set the timer to do like 5 minutes of coding, I believe, and you turn off every other distraction and you just focus on your code. And then after that 5 minutes is done, there is a break like 1 minute, I believe, and then it started again. And when you're on break, you're not coding at all. Was it like
I think it's like 20 minutes on, 5 minutes off. So like 20 minutes work and 5 minutes break.
Something I don't remember the interval, but yeah, it's
been
like
proven to be effective.
I don't know about coding. I know for sure, like in other situations. Yeah, and Mel uses it like for, she used it a lot for studying and stuff, and it was effective. I don't know about coding because I feel like it takes me 15, 20 minutes to like get in.
Right.
Yeah, and then like you have to
I'll look up
and then
I look at the clock and be like 4 hours just passed, and I didn't even get up from my seat, which that's its own separate problem, right? Yeah, like,
yeah. I think the idea is like cycling work and break, which in practice, I mean, in theory, I think is nice. I think in programming, it might be a unique case where it doesn't really work as well in practice. At least for me, it doesn't work as well in practice because like flow state and getting into a flow and
sure,
like getting into the problem like takes me like 20 minutes anyway. So by the time I've like sat down, open my IDE, like open my dev environment, listen to some good music and start like really understanding what I'm trying to write, it's already been like 15 minutes. So
yep. This is also why meetings kill productivity, because when you're like a meeting, but you have an hour gap, you can get some work done. Like, no, I got maybe 5 minutes of work done in that hour. Yeah, I would agree on that. And ultimately, like with hard challenges, oftentimes I find the best solution is if you're stuck, just walk away. Like you sitting there like mucking through it as your head gets more and more like trapped.
Bang your head into a wall.
Yeah, like I find so many times I'm just like walking around the house, I'm just like, oh, I should have tried that. And I come back down and I try it and it works. Almost never, usually doesn't work still, but sometimes it works.
Yeah, I usually like, I'm stuck with my code. I go out of the room and my husband like, you're thinking about code, is it? Yeah.
Yeah,
it's like that blank stares.
I feel like there's a look that we give off because I've been accused of this for like forever, and they're like, yeah. We see the gears going. You're thinking, you're not listening to us, are you? Like, no.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm just like going out, getting some water or something. I didn't even know I'm actually walking, kind of stuff.
Yeah, I do that a lot too. Mel always calls me out on it, especially on the highway. If I'm like, if I'm just like,
oh, that's scary, Mehdi.
Like, are you asleep or are you coding in your head?
99% of the time it's 100% of the time it's coding in my head. I think.
Yeah. All right, guys. It's 1:15 almost. I gotta go. Good chat.
Alrighty. Yeah, it was fun.
Now I just want to go play in Svelte and take a year off to catch up on coding.
Yes. All right. If you do, let me know.
I will let you know as soon as I start dabbling, because it's gonna happen. I'm just to the point where I'm like, it's fine, but I want to see like life can be better. So let's start finding out what's better and then encouraging that stuff.
So maybe refactor that is here.
In Svelte?
Is in Svelte, yeah, in Svelte.
Nice, I like it.
Yes.
Although,
do it.
Or just find a much simpler, more fun project.
Yeah, that's probably a better idea.
Yeah, it's like yeah. I'm not even go into it. We don't have time, but Slick is even too big, and that's a tiny project compared to Datasir. To do a refactor on. Okay.
All right then.
I'll catch you guys later.
Right with y'all.
It was fun.
See ya.
Later. Good luck, Yasirah.
Thanks, Mehdi. Bye, Kevin. Bye. Kevin.
Bye.